Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito, del presente. E tutto questo esiste anche grazie a te.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm Massimo Robberto from the Space Telescope Science Institute. We're here for this evening's encounter. The title is Wonderbound, Destined to for Wonder. Yep. So this is also the title of the exhibition at the meeting this year, which is an exhibition focusing on the images taken by the James Webb Space Telescope, this last instrument, which is letting us to see the universe with an incredible richness and depth and profundity that maybe before this launch of this mission, we could hardly imagine what we would be able to see with it. We're seeing stars being born, planetary systems in their native environments. We're seeing galaxies right to the edges of the universe, to the extreme edges of time, and the light that took billions of years to reach us. And so, as has already happened with Hubble, these images, these pictures, not only bring out the extraordinary interest of the scientific community, of the astronomers, but also of the great public. They've been around the world. We see them on coffee cups, on calendars, on T-shirts, whatever. And so these pictures, these images are appreciated not just by those who understand the physics of them, but also they have an attractive value of themselves, an intrinsic value, and they make us feel something we call wonder. And the Pope Leo, he echoed these themes. He'd completely understood this, and he said it last year at the summer school at Castel Gandolfo. I'll quote him literally: the images that fill us with wonder, and in fact with a mysterious joy, while we contemplate their sublime beauty. This evening I want to talk about this. I want to really focus on this aspect in particular, that normally we can imagine that the wonder is something marveling, that they require a bit of naivety, a surprise that comes from what you don't know, from what's unforeseen, and that then bit by bit, as we get to know more, we get used to them, and then maybe these feelings are ephemeral and they disappear at this point. And instead, in reality, I think that this experience of the scientists in particular is exactly the opposite. This wonder grows the more you know these things, the more reality comes towards us and is intercepted and is comprehended, is looked at, the more it can increase this wonder, this awe, and so we get a much more interesting dynamic, which can be on everything that happens to us. We'd like that our whole life to be full of wonder. But today we're going to be helped by certain people who are protagonists, central protagonists of this adventure of knowing. So I want to introduce them to you, to our three speakers who are really unique. We have, and who will recount to us, starting from, if you like, from various different points of view. So Celenza, and over there, I'd call him he's a super president. He's the Dean of the School of Arts and Scientists at Johns Hopkins University. So everything falls under his umbrella, arts and sciences, at one of the greatest research universities in America. His specialization is the study of the Renaissance in the 1400s in Italy. And it's interesting because this is a moment, a unique moment in our history in which we refocused the gaze on man, and man looked at himself, and this aspect of awe, of wonder, became focused looking at us in that moment. He asked me to tell you these 12 specialist books that he's written. There's one published in Italian by the Corriere della Sera, which is entitled The Lost Renaissance. It's an attractive book because, as he was telling us, the Italian Renaissance, thinking of Petrarch, Boccaccio, etc., is all the beginning of the Italian language. So there's still fascinating work that was done in Latin that have been analysed by Chris, and that's that book, which you can find in Italian, for those who would like to read it. Richard Souza, a Jesuit, is a Jesuit astrophysicist. He's the director of the Specula Vaticana. This is a unique astronomical observatory, as you can imagine, with a unique history. And it's the point where the scientific study of the universe lives on a daily basis with questions which go far beyond science. And it exists a bit to remind us of this. And then in the middle, Massimo Stiavelli. He was my teacher. He was my boss for 15 years. Massimo Stiavelli, he too is at the Space Telescope Science Institute and at Johns Hopkins, and he's dedicated a lot of his professional life to the development of the great space telescopes with NASA, first Hubble and then James Webb, in our institute. And so he's the person who finds himself really in the front line of in the front row in front of these beautiful images discovered by these telescopes. And so he will speak of his personal experience of awe and wonder. So from here, I'd start our conversation with a few questions. The first one is for you, Richard. I think that's the curiosity of everybody is about the Specula Vaticana. How did you manage to how does one become a Jesuit, become its director? Tell us about yourself.
The Specula Vaticana is the scientific observatory of the Vatican State. It does a service for the Pope, for the Universal Church. It was refounded in 1891 by Pope Leo XIII. But its origins are in the first pontifical observatory by the Jesuits in the Roman College in the 6th century. Pope Leo XIII, when he refounded it nearly 100 years ago, he wanted this new observatory to show the church that faith and science could go together, and through scientific research, the participation of great scientists, collaborators. In particular, he was really interested in the great project of that age, Carte du Ciel, the map of the sky. It was a project of nearly all the observatories at the time to do the first map of the sky, to measure the sky. and they used for the first time photography with the sky. What you saw today at Wonderbound at the exhibition was the first time they used photography, which comes from the very first project led by Pope Leo XIII. So this was the birth of the Specula Vaticana. Today it's led by the Jesuit order, and there's very few people, only 12 members of staff, all priests and brothers of the Jesuit company, with a few other collaborators. The Vatican insists that these who work at the observatory are only Jesuits or priests, because they want to show the church that the priests and the church is interested in science. It's nice to see a priest in a lab coat working in a lab with watching meteorites or stars with a telescope. They follow a tradition of Father Angelo Secchi, the father of Italian physics, or Father Georges Lemaitre, who is known for discovering the Big Bang. And they work in all fields. It's a small observatory, but they work from cosmology to planets to the formation of galaxies. But today at Castle Gandolfo, you can no longer observe because of pollution, light pollution. So they also have a small telescope in the south of the United States in Arizona, at the top of Mount Graham, at 3,000 meters up. So they use a very small 2-meter telescope, which is incomparable to James Webb, but it's their telescope, supported by the money of the Vatican, and they use this for research. My journey is very easy. You just have to be a Jesuit. There's very few. So eventually, one of us become director. It's easy.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Massimo, I'll ask you a similar question, not about how you can be a Jesuit, but tell us of your history, your story. How did you arrive at this institute? So I had a rather winding path to get there. I was always interested in science, always curious as a young man, encouraged by my parents, who weren't particularly rich, but they wanted to give me things that would stimulate my curiosity. But one particular event, let's see if we can see the slides. Maybe okay, this is the slide. This event was fundamental for me. I was 8 years old, and on our little black and white TV that we had, the picture wasn't anything like as nice as this one. I saw Armstrong and Aldrin, who stepped onto the moon for the first time, set foot on the moon. This struck me deep down as a young man, as a child. And this gave me the idea that I wanted to be involved in some way in this. At 8 years old, I didn't know whether I wanted to be a NASA engineer or an astrophysicist or an astronaut. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I wanted to be involved in this incredible thing that I could see. So I carry on my normal course of studies, and until one point at school, I was exposed to this phrase: "Don't live like mere beasts, but follow virtue and knowledge," from Dante. This for me, it was like an opening. My parents had, in America, you'd say that they were socially conservative. They're sort of rigid, old-fashioned, but righteous, and so following virtues seemed like a natural thing, of how I was brought up. But knowledge was something new, and this phrase inspired me a lot because it said to me, so you can seek to work, to involve yourself and learn something. And then I continued my studies. I didn't know what to do, but whether I became a theoretical physicist, theoretical astrophysicist, and I was always very interested in many different things. I jumped a bit from one thing to another, and so eventually the road took me to Baltimore with the European Space Agency, and the space telescope had just been repaired just before then in 95, and this showed what could be done. And this is a fascinating images. I was to be able to work on Hubble with the various instruments, including being included in the development of new instruments for Hubble. But sometimes fortune helps in your life, and I started to work on the next generation space telescope. This was a telescope that should be the successor to Hubble, and it was first thought about in 1 year before Hubble was launched, because these projects have an enormously long time scale, so you need to start thinking of them soon. So Hubble had its problem with the mirror, and so that blocked any further development of the new telescope. But then in 95, Hubble had been repaired, everything was functioning perfectly, and just a few months after I was there was a conference to relaunch the next generation space telescope. And from then, I started working on it ever since then, sometimes simply voluntarily because it interested me in various roles and positions, but I worked on this telescope that then became James Webb for pretty much 30 years. And I became a member of the science working group. I had the pleasure of being able to give advice on how to develop the program. And so then I was at the institute throughout the development and the launch and the commissioning and the beginning of science operations. So this ugly photo of me, I show it because there's something nice behind it, which is the last time that I saw the JWST, the James Webb Space Telescope, in our ground facility in California. And then it was then sort of packed up and sent to French Guiana and launched from there. These were 6 months of hard work to get the telescope to come online, which I with my staff, I compared it to going through Dante's hell. But in the end, we managed to image the stars, and this we'll talk about it later. But I think this is my favourite James Webb image, even if it's not in my research field. Thank you, Massimo. Chris.
Di Hopkins.
Tell us about Hopkins and you and your path and your career and what it means to lead a big university. Thank you, Massimo, for having invited me and for being here with me, you guys. So for me, I've done different things as a professor before being the director of John Hopkins, where I discovered another side of myself, an administrative side. But speaking of American universities, especially American research universities like Hopkins, there's a moment that happened in Europe, and that was a reform in the 1800s, 1810 by William von Humboldt, a great diplomatic, classicist, etc., German, where he did a reform of the medieval universities, a university that we can recognize as the modern universities of today. And the idea is to have a few things that are important. The first, the idea of knowing, of knowledge, the Wissenschaft, the German idea. He writes, interestingly, that the Wissenschaft is a thing that we need to continue to look for, also knowing the fact that we will never truly reach the eternal truth. So it's a sense of a mission. And the second thing of German university was the idea of freedom, something that... So freedom of study, freedom of research, the freedom to teach in the way that seems best. So this big idea is very important. There were two universities founded on this idea. One was John Hopkins, the other was Chicago. And then the other big universities, which you hear of, Harvard, Yale, they were converted in that age from colleges for the formation of young people, of classic studies, to this new idea of research universities. And an important fact, an interesting fact, that from 1810 to the First World War, in this century, a bit more than a century, 9,000 Americans went to Germany to study, to have their doctorate degree. And then they came back to the United States and became these reformers. And at John Hopkins, this idea of liberty of research was always very important. Maybe we can say a second thing, and a second aspect of American research universities is that they have to have the capacity to put together different disciplines, different ideas. Even here, we have astrophysicists, humanities. We're speaking of internal research, but also research that's shared with the public. And this is also very important, in my opinion. We were speaking with a colleague earlier, and this idea is very important because we need to learn. We learn from questions that the public ask us. And so these things are, for me, very important. I think there's many other things to say, but the university as an idea, the idea of research, the idea of freedom of research, the idea of sharing different disciplines, sharing information across disciplines, I would conclude here for this response, but there's much else to say, I would say.
Proviamo.
Let's try to dig a bit into the topic of today's meeting. So I'll ask Massimo. You've directed hundreds of people in these great projects. This theme of wonder, of awe, how does it flourish? What place can it find in our daily work in these great research centres? Is it an important driver or not? So, unfortunately, not enough. I think that when we find yourself in a journey like mine, for many years I was basically an administrator, because you need to manage the finances of NASA, from NASA, which parts of the work are more important, which are the things more at risk, etc. And so they're rare, very precious moments that obviously you hope to find some young student, some young researcher who work with you, and so maybe you save a bit of space in your calendar for them to protect it, to have that hour or couple of hours per week to enjoy research, to hear what these people are bringing forth, and to guide them. But for a long period, I was, above all, doing an administrative role, and the thing that made it tolerable was the fact that there's an objective at the end that you want to reach. And this, in the most difficult moments, which there were, for example, in 2010, I think, the Chamber of Congress decided to zero our budget, to cut it down to zero. This is something that statistically we knew might have happened. We didn't know when, but such a big thing like James Webb can't pass without having some crisis or other. And so then we had to work hard to be reintegrated. But we had always this behind us, the idea, this scientific dream that we'd realized once, that we could realize if the telescope went into orbit. And also, we had colleagues who were great sustainers, but also skeptics. There were people who said, but the images of the James Webb, they won't be that nice, that they had their different, perhaps pseudo-scientific methods, reasons for saying that. But many of us had our own motivations, our final aim, which pushed us to go ahead and to put in long hours to push the project forward. And then, obviously, the important things came out that gave us some comfort that we were on the right path. For example, when we started to plan the telescope, basically they weren't. That we don't know of any galaxies at the distance that the telescope would be able to reach, that it was aimed at. So we started to construct something to see some objects that we weren't even sure existed, because the models and the scientific progress gave us strong indications, strong clues that they would exist. And so, bit by bit, every discovery we made with the Hubble Space Telescope, they gave us more confidence that we were building something that would actually be useful. Obviously, that encouraged us. And so there was this surprising thing, I thought, that at the discovery, not just of planets outside the solar system, because that we pretty much thought that they would be hard to measure, but there would be some there. It would be strange if the sun was the only star to have a planet around it. But the first attempts that managed to discover the to measure the atmospheric composition of these extrasolar planets. This was a really difficult act of measurement that required super stable and sophisticated instrumentation, and they started to do this with Hubble and other telescopes, and immediately we realized that James Webb would be very powerful in this type of measurements. And this, again, gave us another impulse. If we could do a couple of adjustments to the plan to be able to be optimizing it onto this type of science, which didn't exist back in '95 when we started. And so the search for wonder was in reality that which guided us and pushed us forward along the road to go ahead and to get to the discoveries that actually happened. So there's this expectation of wonder, a presentiment of something great. Thank you.
Richard, let's talk about the exhibition, this strange exhibition that joins the Specular Vaticana and John Hopkins. So we organised the exhibition, the Year of the Jubilee, last year. A version of this exhibition together with John Hopkins. It was the idea of the ex-director of the Specular, Father Guy Consolmagno, and the Mrs. Anna Marlis, which is here from John Hopkins. And I have to say that it's always been a long tradition with us to not to honor scientific progress, but also focus on the beauty of the stars. And the exhibition, in some way, follows this tradition. And then last year, just in June 2025, so a month after the election of Pope Leo, he met our students of the summer school. And you also cited some of his words earlier. And he speaking with the students of the wonder of, he went beyond. He didn't only speak of wonder and awe, but he also spoke of sharing this joy. He said to these students, look, you are at the avant-garde of research. You're studying the latest images of scientists, but you can't keep this only for yourselves. You have to go and share this joy with others, with everyone. And this really pushed us to show these images to everyone. It wasn't only for scientists. These images belong to everyone. And so we organized in October of last year, we opened this exhibition. You came too to see us. The images weren't these, it wasn't as big as today at Rimini. Our spaces were limited. But we also planned to transfer the exhibition from the Specola to the Apostolic Convention, but the Pope had other plans, that he remodeled his palace, and so he lived there in the summer, so it wasn't possible. But one day the exhibition will come to his palace. But I can say that the summer of this year he came to us in a very private manner, and he saw the exhibition. He was very struck by the images, and he asked questions. You know that he's very mathematical, and he asked us difficult questions. Some of them I didn't know how to answer, but he was very curious. But he looked at the images and he asked me, when was this star born? When was this type of star born? Why is it red? Why? He was very curious. It was nice to see this. And then when he saw, he gave us a little speech to our group. He used these words. Contemplating the sky invites us to see our fears and our weaknesses, to the light of the immensity of God. And the telescopes and the images should remain places in which glory of creation of God is met with reverence, deepness, and joy. And this, for us, was a confirmation of our mission to show the world that science and faith can go together, but also gives us this the strength to share this joy, not only wonder, but to share the joy. And I'm very happy that the meeting of Rimini is welcoming this exhibition in a massive format where people can examine with exactness the small pixels of James Webb. And we can see in all its glory and largeness.
Chris, the title of this meeting, Dante and the Stars. So you're a student of the Renaissance. What do these words say to us, people of the 21st century? What is for us wonder? So I think something really important, that there's an interesting story here. And I want to underline something that my colleague has said here, this curiosity. Because for the thinkers of the Renaissance the ancient world was very important, but not also the Greek and Roman world, but also the Christian antiquity, and some of the philosophers would be very interesting to hear. So we had two founders of philosophy, Plato and Aristotle. And Plato, in his dialogue, which is called Theaeteto, the great dialogue, his great epistemological dialogue about how do we know things, and this is the idea of epistemology. And he, as always, he had his principal interlocutor, who was Socrates, who was put the questions in the voice of this other person. He's a bit of an annoying person who keeps asking questions until it gets to one that doesn't have an answer. So at some point, one of his interlocutors says that he expresses a sense of wonder, and Socrates responds like this: this feeling of wonder is that's the Greek word. This feeling of wonder really belongs to philosophers, because wonder is the sole principle of philosophy. So the idea for them, philosophy was a way to live. It wasn't just a way of syllogisms, but it was really a way to live, as a colleague was saying, with curiosity. And then there are famous quotes from Aristotle from the start of metaphysics, when he says that man today, like at the beginnings, started to do philosophy really thanks to wonder. So this is right at the beginning of philosophy, he says. And then at the very beginning of metaphysics, he says, all human beings, by their nature, desire to know. So, in other words, it's something that characterizes humans. And so as we pass to the Christian antiquity, to the fathers of the church, we can find another emphasis, an emphasis that can bring us ultimately to God, so beyond the things that we can discover. So there's a father of the church, a Greek father, Gregory of Nyssa, who's almost a contemporary of St. Augustine, a little bit before, and he writes amongst many things, amongst many writings. He gives a life of Moses, and in a certain point he says that this is the true vision of God. I will never find satiety, I'll never find total filling of my desire. So contemplating what is beyond us, that we'd never get fed up of it, never get full of it. And then we get to Augustine, and there's a big link between Augustine and the Italian Renaissance, which would be interesting to look at. St. Augustine, as we know, was one of the most important fathers of the church. He wrote many important things, and especially, for instance, his book, the most important book perhaps, the Confessions, this idea almost as a prayer, expressing his life, something autobiographical. In the 10th book of that, he speaks of the nature, and the idea is that I see things in nature. I see the sun, I see the other things, and sometimes I feel pleasure from it. So what does that mean? Has a couple of questions about Earth. He says, "You, God, what do you say to the world?" And that the Earth says, "I am not God, non sum." And he asks the same thing of the sea, of animals, and so on. What are you? And they say, we are not your God. Who is? You need to look above us for that. And so he goes ahead, and he asks the heavens. So I asked to the heavens, to the sun, to the moon, to the stars, and they also said in response, So neither we are God. So you need to keep looking. And finally, he, in a very passionate way, and quite a poignant moment in the Confessions, he says, Tell me, my God, he's still speaking to that Lord. Tell me of my God. I know that you guys aren't God, non estis, but so at least tell me something about God. So he's speaking to nature. And finally, what do they say? That the natural elements, they exclaimed in a great voice, He made us, God made us. That's what they can say about him. So the idea of contemplating, wanting to know something like this. So many, many years after, there's the famous Petrarch, the humanist, in the 1300s, as we know. He, at a certain point, wrote a very interesting letter to his confessor, an Augustinian theologian who's called Dionysius of Burgos and Sepolcro, and he talked about the descending from Mont Ventoux, which is a 60-odd kilometres from Avignon, where he was. So he was 32 years old about when he wrote this thing. And the story that he recounts is that he and Frate Gerardo. He was climbing up this mountain with Frate Gerardo, a monk, and he said to him, he recounts the climb up the mountain, and he says that going up with this brother, while Brother Gerard chose a direct, maybe a bit harder but straight up path, but I chose an easier path that was actually much longer and more winding. But finally, when I got there on the top, Petrarch met him, and he says to him, he takes up a little pocket volume of the Confessions of Augustine, a little pocket-sized book, and Dionigi said to him, and he cites a phrase from the same part of the book that I just cited. He says, Petrarch says, God who was present is my witness that this is a bit that Augustine put like as the summary of everything that he said, that man always looking at the mountains, but they forget about themselves. And so in this idea we have either the idea of curiosity, which pushes us in research for new knowledge, and also the idea that we must remember sometimes that probably there are things beyond us, and that this same contemplation of nature, of natural things, can stimulate in us this idea that maybe we are accompanied by something other than us. So, thank you. So, Richard, I want to ask you a question. Why do we wonder? What do we have in our heart that makes us wonder, that makes us marvel? What is the reality that's so desirable?
Massimo, I think that the sky has always been our common heritage. All the ancient cultures, the Egyptians, the Mayans, the Chinese, the Greeks, the Indians, they looked at the sky and studied their place in the cosmos. And as a species, we've always looked at the sky to answer, as I say, our eternal questions. Where do we come from? Where are we going? And are we alone? These three eternal questions of every culture. And even though these ideas of the cosmos have changed through time with centuries, these same questions are questions of everybody. Even at the Vatican Observatory, at John Hopkins, we use new instruments, Hubble, James Webb, to ask ourselves these questions: the beginning of the universe, the end, and are we alone? The sky brings us to these eternal questions. And I ask myself too, why do the skies have such a great fascination to us? The response, I think, finds itself in the depth of the human heart. As the director of the Specula, I have the luck to accompany VIPs through the Sistine Chapel, and every time they look up, and I point to the famous painting of Michelangelo, the God creating Adam, and I tell them that you can also see this painting in another way. You can see Adam trying to reach God, trying to reach the infinite, trying to reach transcendence. And this really is a thing inside each of us. I have the opportunity to take the small Celestron telescope to show the young people in the slums of Mumbai the skies, the great cardinals of the Vatican, Harvard professors, and everyone with their naked eye in front of this telescope. They all say, wow, wow. Not with the image on a screen, but with their naked eye seeing the rings of Saturn, the images of Jupiter. They all say, wow. And what is this thing that brings us to say, wow? It's something inside of us, like Adam trying to reach God always. And it's the wonder inside of us. And this is really the thing about being human, to reach infinity. And we have to say that there's nothing more infinite and physical than the sky, the night sky. But I want to go a bit beyond this too. It's not only about being human, the sky that helps us to be more human. I want to say that something else too. It's from antiquity, the universe, the sky has always represented the entirety, completion. In contemplating the beauty of the universe through these images, these spectacular images, we as humans, we don't only search for beauty, but we also search for completion, for wholeness, for healing. And I say this, in front of an image of James Webb, the thing Massimo showed us, thing that Massimo will shortly show us, an image so beautiful. We are also looking for a bit of healing. And I say this, in a world so lacerated by war, in front of people who don't respect the national law, we have an intensity for war. Us, as humans, we need beauty. Because for healing, to heal our fragility. I remember this famous saying by Dostoevsky in his book, The Idiot, in where he repeats the phrase, beauty will save the world. And it's here today in front of this image. This image brings us not only to wonder, but also to healing. Heal our fragility and our faults.
Massimo, tell us a bit of a discovery that you've made, something that has touched you at this level of surprise, that reached this point of making you say wow. Wow, there's been many times I've said that, I'm speaking seriously, that not just for things I've done, but unexpected things, but the wonder, the awe often come when there's a component of surprise in it, and sometimes it could be a surprise due to something that worked better than expected, beyond our expectations. For example, I won't give all the details, but one of the things that I was interested in doing with James Webb was measuring the abundance of oxygen in distant galaxies. This is a complicated measurement with spectral observations where you separate the light like a prism would do to see the rainbow of different colours, and with an instrument we can see which bits are brighter and which are darker in detail. And there are techniques that can give fairly rough results and some that can give very precise ones, but requires to measure very weak things. And I hoped that James Webb would enable us to do this measurement up to a certain distance out. And almost straight away, one of the first images that was released in July, when the science operations started, was published in the public domain. So some data was put in the public domain that demonstrated just how it was possible to do this measurement at distances that were unforeseeable, how far we could do this, for things distances at which we didn't even know there were any galaxies until a few years ago. And so for there was just the wonder that the instrument works so well, better than that we thought it would. One of the things that bring out wonder or awe in me is that I find beautiful is when trying to understand an astrophysical system that seems very complicated, that you find at the end that there are some simple ideas at the back of it. And for me, I agree totally with everything Richard had said, but there's a component which I think hasn't been mentioned, is the connection between beauty and simplicity. For often, I think, maybe I'm exaggerating, but that beauty is simplicity and simplicity is beauty. But because you understand that there are some mechanisms, some deep mechanisms in action that generate complexity in a way that, again, we wouldn't have expected. And that this brings out wonder and surprise. And some episodes of this type, there are many surprises of wonder that came out with James Webb. Another component in front of an image is that certain images everyone finds them beautiful, but if you know the physics that's behind them, behind these images, it can happen that it can be even more beautiful because you understand how certain phenomena of chemistry or physics that happen in space bring us to this image that seems that it is as we see it. And so, in a certain sense, I agree with what Massimo said at the beginning, that at this meeting, that being within the field, you can find things even more beautiful. They can bring out even more awe and wonder, because you know enough to understand what's happening. It's not always true, but it can be. Yeah. The other component that I want to finish with isn't so much linked to the images, but to James Webb itself. So it links a bit with what Richard was saying, that James Webb was realized by 10,000 people who maybe have a different range of ideas about everything, but they were all motivated to construct it, and I think it was technically 28 different countries contributed to it, to realize a thing that transcends a single country. It was constructed in the United States because the US was the only country that had the financial resources to put it together, and the scientific mechanisms that would let us do this sort of an undertaking. But the data are accessible to everybody in the whole world, and any researcher in the world can request observations justifying the reasoning behind them, and the images that come out are distributed in the whole world, and they generate wonder in the whole world. They generate a positive message, a unifying one, that in a certain sense, a bit of the role of planetary ambassador. The fact that something beautiful exists and can be shared. When the first images were released to the public, there are some standard methods which are used for valuing impact, and I don't want to say, as we test, I don't want to show off, but it seems that the total sum of the impact overtook, it got up to 100 million, which means 100 billion, which means that every inhabitant of planet Earth had more occasions to see these. Everybody in the whole world had more than one chance to see the James Webb images, and this shows us the idea of the diffusion, the impact is that's incredible. And it's another thing that I think is very valid and positive. It's another wow. Thank you. Thank you. So we've got still 2 or 3 minutes, so I'll take advantage to ask you all the same question. One thing in your career, in your research, that has surprised you, which made you think this is really good. That I think, wow, think about this. Chris, I'll start, but one time I remember in the 1990s, I was doing research in the Vatican Library, and this might seem a small thing, but I discovered that in a capsule in the archive of St. Peter, I found the will of Cardinal Orsini. I found that the original version of his will, and he speaks of the books he's collected. He was a bit of a humanist, and it was a nice surprise. It attracted my attention to this. It stopped me a bit. Thank you that I discovered this. Thank you.
So for me, maybe 2018, when I was doing a postdoc at the University of Michigan with my rota, we found a big thing on the history of our Andromeda, our neighbor, our neighboring galaxy. And the thing that created the galaxy, because up until that point, the galaxy thought it was a calm galaxy, but we discovered that there was a collision 2 billion years ago with another galaxy, half the size of our galaxy. And this is a thing so surprising that we said in front of everybody, finally, we can understand these images of Andromeda, because it's like this. For me, this was a wow moment. I couldn't speak for a week after this. So a big discovery, yes. Really beautiful. And I'll add my small wow from a couple of days ago. We went to Spain. The eclipse, that was it's always a spectacle of nature that enchants you. That 1 minute you have to be there. But we can talk about our wows. Everyone has their own, and you can't substitute this. It's your own. So to close, I'd invite everyone to go see the exhibition, because it's an occasion for everyone to remain in wonder once again in front of the beauty of nature that we talked about tonight. So this is my invite to you, together with the invite to return tomorrow at 12 o'clock in the morning in the Science Arena, where we will meet again for a Q&A, an open moment where you can ask questions. And this is a moment where you can meet the speakers from today with freedom to ask what is in your heart. So I'd close here, and I'll read you a message that we give each other each time we have an encounter like this, something that permits the meeting to exist. We remind you that the meeting is a third sector, and you can donate some money to the charity to support the meeting. Thank you.
Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo esiste anche grazie a te.